Hi, thanks for tuning in to Dirtbike's video series. Today is a very special day. We finally get to ride the 2024 KTM 450 SX Factory Edition. Especially important because we know this bike will be the basis for the 2025 models and going forward for the KTMs for quite some time. We showed up at Glen Helen early this morning. Unfortunately, we got rained out. We loaded up the bike and took it to one of our secret riding areas. We won't say exactly where it is. It's got some sand, it's got some whoop-de-doos, perfect test track. And more than anything else, it's not raining here. Now this bike isn't that from the previous 450 SX, but there are some key areas. If you remember, the 2023 model was criticized for having a very harsh feel to it. That was mostly thanks to a new, more rigid frame. So KTM has addressed some key areas. Around the steering head, there's a little less material. Around the top of the shock, there's a little less material where it mounts. Key differences to the engine mount brackets. The linkage is different. The rear spring is a little stiffer. And overall, there's been a lot of fine tuning on this bike. You won't see huge differences. The only visual change really is the slightly pointier shrouds. More than anything else though, what we're excited about on this bike is the KTM Connect App. If you remember a few years ago, KTM rolled this out and we thought it was going to be like Yamaha's Power Tuner. Pretty quickly they ran into supply problems and that didn't really materialize for the public. Tested the bike, we know how the app worked. When it came down to real world and people's availability for that technology, it didn't really happen. So now, round two, they've done it again, and this time the KTM Connect app and the technology around it is way more sophisticated. It's integrated with LitPro. So not only do you get the option of changing the engine braking, the throttle response, you also get full analytics on your riding. You can save certain tracks. We don't really know all the details about it yet because, well, we just got the bike today. We're still kind of learning it. We've seen the technology. We know what LitPro has shown us they can do in the past, and we're really looking forward to trying that once we get a little more time on the bike. For now, we're just going to ride the bike and learn how that new frame works because we have quite a few test riders with a lot of time on the previous model. So Sean Lipanovich is our primary test rider today. He has a ton of time on the 2023 model, but he actually owns a 2022 model. That bike has the frame that he really likes. Now, he kind of skipped over the 23 because he felt like that new frame was a little bit too rigid, and he just liked the compliance of the old frame. So he's the perfect guy to ride this bike and tell us exactly what the differences are, because he's been a KTM guy for a long time. In terms of the motor, we don't have a lot of differences. In fact, the tuning on the bike is pretty much the same as it was in 2024 with the standard edition. That's fine with us because it is pretty much the most powerful bike on the dyno. Now, we know dyno tests don't really mean that much to us, but the great thing about this bike is that it's very rideable. The power comes on so smooth, you would never know that it's making almost 60 horsepower. When you get into a drag race with other 450s, you know right away because it puts that power to the ground, and it's really easy to control. KTM does offer the two maps. The green map is a little more aggressive. There isn't that big a difference. Pretty much we do ride it in the green map most of the time. Even though it's so powerful, you don't really need that. More power is generally more fun. The real test here is, how does that new frame work? Well, in almost every way, it feels like the standard edition 2024 model. That means it turns very well. If you remember, they tilted the motor a little bit in order to generate more anti-squat because the old bike had a tendency to ride low coming out of turns. Well, now it stays upright in its travel a little bit more compared to the 2022 model. This bike is exactly like that. It's the same as the 24 standard edition in that way. The one difference that we're especially excited about is just the comfort level. We never really had an issue with the bike's actual performance on the track, but you just felt every pebble on the track, it seemed like. When you're riding along half throttle or something like that, you would feel everything. It would come right through the seat and you'd feel it all the way through your bones. This bike doesn't do that. We know that there's still a lot of controversy with this. Professional ranks, some guys actually do prefer the more rigid frame. Those guys, they're not interested in comfort. We are. Our bones are brittle, and we're not exactly interested in doing supercross whoops. But if you want to compare it to the 22 model, which had the generation before this, the frame that the gasses were riding with in Supercross last year, that bike is still much more compliant. We don't really think that's much of an issue in terms of performance. But if you're one of those guys who just spends hours and hours on the bike, well, you might like that extra little bit of cush. Now, we will say that we're not really comparing apples to apples here. We know this bike does have like a stiffer spring in the rear, and that's because when they make any change to the frame, there are ripple effects all the way through the whole motorcycle. They've made valving changes to the fork, even on the factory edition. The shock itself has different valving and completely different linkage. That linkage does have the exact same geometry as the standard edition, but every piece of it has been rethought. There's a little less friction, the bolt is smaller, and it generally flexes a little bit more. So KTM did listen to our complaints last year about the comfort level of this bike, and they have addressed it. Now, we know that in the extended KTM Gas Husqvarna family, some of the pro riders are divided on which bikes they'll be riding in Supercross. They gave those guys all the option of riding the new frame or the old frame because both are homologated by the AMA for Supercross. We know that there are a few that chose to go with the old frame simply because they had all the testing already done on that bike and it was a known commodity. For the most part though, the guys all agree that the new frame is cushier, and we think so too. So keep in mind that this is our first day with this bike, and we learned last year that the old frame, well, it got a lot more compliant with more time. We have maybe 1.2 hours or 2 hours on this bike so far, and we know that's not nearly enough time for the frame to loosen up and feel more comfortable. So we're pretty pleased with this bike. We think it's a step in the right direction, and we can't wait to get more time on it. And we especially want to find out more about the KTM Connect app. Stay tuned and we'll have more for you. If you'd like to check out some of our other videos, hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you get notified when we have something new. And as always, go to dirtbikemagazine.com so you can have all the latest on both off-road bikes, motocross bikes, racing, and all the stuff we do. And then check us out on social media. Thanks for watching.